You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-com strategy, technology and CX-focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and replatform specialists James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-com strategy of leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This episode is sponsored by WorldPay. Our topic today is question we're posing ourselves, how do you modernise your e-commerce platform without risking revenue? So we're coming at this from is replatforming the right answer? Not always, of course. If it is the right answer, how do you build in incrementable capability? How do you fix problems and modernise your tech stack and do it in a way that is, sustainable, but also isn't going to cause you problems when you get to launch that could end up compromising revenue? Because it's very easy to make change, but change doesn't always necessarily deliver the results you're expecting. And there's definitely been a bit of a change in the market, like a shift away from like cyclical multi-year transformation projects towards, better thinking about what the right tech stack going forward is. And this might be keeping an existing platform, upgrading to a later version, or making great use of APIs to bolt on capability, or introducing middleware to separate existing systems. So there's lots of ways that people are going through technological change, but not necessarily doing a massive rip and replace. So with that in mind, Paul and I are going to riff on what we're seeing, what discussions that we have with people, recommendations we're making. Anything you want to add to that, Paul?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think just from what you've said so far, there's obviously going to be lots of ways the discussion can go. So no, let's jump into it.
Let's start with the question on reducing technical debt, because this comes up every project. We want to reduce technical debt. And technical debt exists for many reasons. It could be on like old legacy tech, and therefore there's a lot of code inefficiencies built up over the years. It could be multiple development partners have been involved, whether it's agencies or internal dev teams who have different ways of coding. And over the years, that's layered on lots of like code inefficiencies or different ways of handling coding practices, to lots of third parties being integrated into tech stack. So you get inevitable over the years, without real scrutiny, you get technical debt, which can result in like code blow, inefficient themes, clunky integrations, hacks, workarounds, you name it. And also the joy of like lack of documentation, so you don't actually know why things have been done or how they really work. So in terms of like modernising without risking revenue, what do you advise, or how do you try and help clients to understand and reduce technical debt, so that when you go into like a new solution or improved solution, you're not just repeating previous issues?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, this, because I feel like I very rarely nowadays, I think 3 or 4 years ago, I feel like I would have worked on projects where technical debt would have been like an explicit thing. And I feel like maybe over the last few years, as like the average brand that we would typically work with, I think has probably simplified lots of areas of their business, got better at documentation, moved more to SaaS technologies. I feel like technical debt is maybe more like implied than explicit. And I feel like most of the time, the goals for the projects that we're working on are more around like agility and cost, particularly over the last couple of years. And I feel like, I feel like there's less maybe need. I mean, I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel like, and maybe it is the type of client that I'm working with, I think from a back office perspective, there's often lots of consideration around technical debt, lots of things that have been built specifically for that business, or, multiple systems that have been built in different ways, etc., etc. But I feel like nowadays, I don't chat to as many businesses where there's technical debt is as much of a consideration. I think it's more about, that's kind of like, I guess, like a sub goal around agility or cost. Does that, do you
Yeah, I think so. I guess it's semantics. What I think it's been, the language that's been used is changing because a lot more people have moved to modern SaaS platforms.
Yeah.
People have moved away from legacy even like the more modern versions of legacy platforms like Salesforce's, Adobe's. People who've moved on to like a BigCommerce, Shopify, or an Accenture, whichever platform, because they've wanted to go away from having critical application support, hosting, compliance, all those requirements that sit as a cost line with either internal engineering or with agencies, right? And therefore, I think that probably changes the conversation. But where I see the conversation is more about, let's call it theme debt, where people have had front-end themes built. They're not in a headless environment. They've had front-end themes built on Stencil for BigCommerce, Liquid for Shopify, etc. And over time, those have become bloated because they've added on customizations to work around theme limitations. They've plugged in lots of third-party scripts. Different developers have worked on it. You've got lots of code that is default to the theme that isn't applicable to that store but hasn't been removed, might be commented out, but it's still in there. You've got all of this kind of noise around clean code. And also, coding discipline moves on.
Yeah.
Let's face it, the coding standards, the efficiency in which you can write code. So that's where I see it and why I still think it's a completely valuable conversation, because if you don't address that and you don't have a really professional approach in engineering to building that themes as lightweight as you can, that's when you end up introducing inefficiency. And I still even see some clients who aren't replatforming, but they're retheming, and they might even retheme with a new agency because they believe that they've exhausted the engineering capacity of an existing partner. And whichever route you go down, for me, fundamentally, a theme is never like, we built it, that's great. You should be auditing constantly because it's in flux.
Yeah, I think that's it's a really good point. And I think it would actually be quite an interesting discussion around like if we had maybe different kind of more technical people on around kind of how you apply that without moving agency, because I would say we will regularly start working with brands that have a really poorly built theme, or a theme, as you say, that has been built 2.5 years ago, and then they've been operating at, kind of MVP retainer level, etc., or maybe even like not having an agency support it, and then they've kind of done things themselves or had a freelance work on it. But yeah, it's super, super common. And I feel like most of the time because I guess you've got two options in that scenario. If you come to a point where you start working with someone like us or you or any other kind of consultancy, you've essentially got the option of building the scope for a project, which could include other value add areas, roadmap items, redesign, etc., to get more value out of the project, and then rebuild the theme. Or you invest a small amount of money, and we've had this a few times and typically we probably have moved agency, and there's a client of ours at the minute that's moving to an agency, and as part of that move, we've basically said to that agency, what is the amount of money that it is going to cost for you to feel 100% comfortable in the theme, to get accessibility in a really good place, performance in a really good place, various kind of little bugs from an SEO perspective, etc. And also for you to be able to maintain that theme and never blame the previous developers ever again. And that might be like a £25,000 piece of work. But I think that if you're moving agency without it being like, a broader project, I always think that's a really good exercise. And that way, you'll find that the developers will be more efficient, and, you'll be more compliant and performant, etc. So I think, overall, I agree with what you're saying. I think it's just interesting hearing technical debt, because I feel like historically I probably would have associated that more with like moving away from SAP or a really complex Adobe site, or like you say, kind of super complex integrations to simplify. But actually, you're right. I mean, it is still technical debt.
Ready to grow your business online? With WorldPay e-commerce, you can deliver fast, secure payments your customers love. backed by global reach and real people-powered support. Scale with confidence and enhance your customers' experience with WorldPay e-commerce.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that you can't get technical debt in modern, dynamic, SaaS, pick your label platforms. You fundamentally can, because it's down to engineering. Yes, the core platforms typically end up being a little bit more performant, a little bit speedier. The APIs are more modern and more open, although legacy ones are playing catch up and investing heavily there. But anyone can build a crap theme. Anyone can take a good platform and build a crap theme on it. It's it can be done. And I think that, like, accessibility, we were talking to each other before we start recording. I was having a really good conversation with Mike, who runs Function, they're an engineering focused agency. You know them well, you work with clients with them, and they really do focus on performance and accessibility in their builds, and they look at that code efficiency, they look at the speed. And I'm not criticizing, I'm calling people out, not all people have that expertise in-house to get that right. And you'll see Core Web Vitals scores, someone replatforms, and the Core Web Vitals actually get worse because the discipline around specific elements of things like accessibility, and there are so many elements to it. And you can, as you'd flagged to me, you can run automated audits of that to flag key areas, but what you can't do is mimic the human evaluation of a site and look at performance and accessibility. So I think there are multiple things that are kind of entwined in this, where there is a code level technical debt, but then there's also a performance and efficiency piece within theme builds, which links into all sorts of decisions, third-party scripts being added. And it's very easy to people to plug in apps and add scripts, but not necessarily look at whether those scripts are running efficiently. Are they adding too much load to the head? I've seen this, one example on the site the other day, Mike brought up and showed a client they've been really struggling with accessibility scores and performance. One of the big issues they had on CLS, cumulative layout shift, which is a no-go for general UX, but it's crap for accessibility as well, is there were loads and loads of images in the main menu that were loading ahead of the main banner. So a main banner placeholder was in there, but the main banner wasn't loading in until the images in the header in the menu, and there were loads of them, had loaded, and then the main banner suddenly jumped and the screenshots moving around. So I think that's so it's I've got a few clients who've gone down the route that you've said, which is let's build better on what we've got. We don't have the business case and investment for a replatforming, but what we can do is improve the front end and therefore measure it objectively about what benefits it delivers.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion, because I mean, for me, I feel like if you're doing any kind of major project, that stuff should be in the scope of work and statement of work and everything else. And I think most agencies nowadays would be pretty focused on at point of launch, or potentially with things like Core Web Vitals, you might find that you need to do some work post warranty period, etc. But I think accessibility as a minimum, I feel like the majority of agencies nowadays, that would be kind of within their baseline, building of a theme. And I would personally expect most agencies, and like you said, I mean, because to be fair, you can emulate a lot of the things that you would want to look at from an accessibility perspective. And I personally would feel that most agencies would be in quite a good position with that. And then I think Core Web Vitals, I mean, it's interesting because I guess so many agencies now and so many people, like Barrett from our team has got like automated checkers that he's built with the kind of AI tools and everything else to check this stuff. And like, it's so easy to do, but yet it's so easy to like, degrade in some of those areas. But I feel like it won't be long before any platform would be having this type of auditing or like automated testing in these areas. And to be honest, it feels like that should be a lot more mainstream, because if you work with bespoke technologies, you're a lot more likely to have like really solid automated testing in place, and maybe not for these areas, but yeah, I'm actually quite surprised that there's not more mainstream services, or some of the mainstream technology partners haven't put that kind of stuff in place.
I think you're right. I mean, fundamentally, yes, and no agency worth its salt wouldn't commit to building to like the WCAG accessibility standards. Most will say that they build to AA. AAA is required in public sector, but not in private sector. That is fine, but there are always gaps. I've not seen a single implementation that has been flawless for accessibility.
No.
And that's not a criticism of developers, because engineers aren't accessibility experts. And there are the two bits. There is the manual testing that has to sit alongside it to identify the little nuances when people are using like screen readers or specific impairments that then create blockages in user journeys that are not detected through scripted tests. So yeah, you're right. Scripted testing is fundamentally important, but I do think that human oversight is needed in order to help go from good to better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you launch a new site, it should be really good, in my opinion, but I agree that there'll always be things that could be stronger. And like you say, I think everyone works to AA, and yeah, I'm sure there's lots of stuff that could be better for other areas.
Well, there's little things like with screen reading. I learned this from speaking to a couple of accessibility specialists. And for example, on add to basket, or if you don't have a visual impairment, on add to basket, you'll get a visual cue. Maybe there's a state change to the button, or there's something flashes up on the screen. Now, you can have that happen, but if somebody with visual impairment can't see that or detect it, and they're using a screen reader. So someone with macular degeneration is a great example. They won't detect the motion or the movement because their vision is not acute enough. What is happening in the screen reader environment to say and tell the screen reader that it can then alert the user that has happened, that the add to cart has worked. So you might find the unit testing goes, right, tabbing through works. It's got to the button. They've been able to click it, great, but they now don't know it's been completed. And there's often those little endpoints of user journeys that get missed off. But let's move on to the next point rather than labouring this one, which is, so at the moment, let's take the context right now, okay, is that actually weirdly, although there seems to be a bit of an uplift in interest in tech investment, replatforming, we're seeing more projects, it's come at a time when the economy is still really challenging. You've got the knock-on impact of the Iran war adding to already existing pressures that are creating trading pressures for e-commerce teams. Are adding costs up. They're making customers shoppers a little bit more nervous about what's going to happen to them and their disposable incomes, with the potential threat of interest rates going up. Okay, all this chaos. Yet there's a lot of discussions going on about doing replatform. So how can people justify replatform ROI in that context of that actually it's not perfect trading conditions?
Yeah, so I think both you and I will have, I'm sure, been in situations over the last 15 years very regularly where essentially a business doesn't have loads of money and they have certain goals that they want to reach, and actually it would be more cost efficient for them to replatform to achieve those goals over a 3-year period than it would be to stay on and maintain their existing platform. So I feel like when you're building a business case, usually you've either got the fact that you'll save money over a period of time. So you might have to obviously assign budget to the build itself, let's say 250K, but equally like your development retainer, your, hosting costs, your whatever other third party costs around your existing platform / tech stack will come down, and over a 3-year period, or maybe even, payments or whatever else. So therefore, over a 3-year period, you'll save money. So that would probably be the most common one that I guess I would see. The other one would be that they would forecast uplift as part of the project. So either, gross sales or whatever else, forecast improvement that ends up making it more efficient to move. And then I guess the last one, which a lot of people that I've worked with have tied to a replatforming, is they have a budget for the year to deliver a roadmap, and let's say that's 250k, and then someone has turned around and been like, actually, we think we can deliver all of this work and replatform for that same amount of money, and then that's then triggered the project. That I feel like all three of those are probably quite relevant, because I agree, like, yeah, the economy obviously isn't great, but I feel like I've also worked with loads of businesses that have just been in challenging positions, and it's been like those types of business cases that they've put forward where it either, you know, you're committing to higher performance or you're saving money, basically.
Yeah, I think right now, because I've been going through this process with a client, and it's we deliberately predicated the cost model and the business case on no uplift in terms of like conversion rate, average order value, because we thought it was quite tenuous to link it specifically to the I know you can. I'm not saying you can't, and I'm not saying you shouldn't. We've had this debate before. I always start from doing, if I can get a business case to work without having to do that, I'm happier that the business case is stronger. So we've looked at sunk development costs. So they have a lot of problems at the moment with an inefficient implementation and a problematic theme that is causing all sorts of bugs. So whenever they do anything new, it creates knock-on effects that has to be triaged and resolved, and that's coming out of support and maintenance. It's not like retain. It's not adding anything proactive to the business. It's just fixing shit, basically. And they're spending around 4K a month on that. And we know from having modeled this on other platforms or with other agencies, if you get the build right and you get the right engineering focus on it, then your support and maintenance costs should be under half that, just for pure like bug fixing on an ongoing basis. So that's modeled in. Then it's the one of the big areas that comes up is the cost of staying on the current platform that you could remove. So it will be, you need a third party for X, Y, or Z, but you won't need that because the capability exists natively in the new platform. Or there is an app that's a much lower cost that does everything that you need. So we've got one around like smart collections logic where they need a third party at the moment to achieve it. But actually you could strip that cost out, and that's a good few grand a year. Then I think those are the ones I always try and find the cost bit. And I think that's an area where it really resonates. And you'll know this well from these discussions, right? CFOs want to know, okay, great, you're spending money. How are you giving me efficiency or saving me money? Where can you strip costs out to my bottom line? And payments can sometimes be an area where you can actually strip out, not always, but it's also possible to take away percentage points and give people margin boost. So I think that's an area that people should spend a bit more time on, the internal process stuff of how much time we spend doing things that are not efficient that we know we will strip out.
Yeah, I think so I agree. I think if you're solely migrating to another platform, you should never forecast uplift. But the one thing I always see as an opportunity is if you are migrating to another platform, you are essentially, even if there's, you know, no change to the front end, you're still building everything from scratch in most instances. So if I was ever to want to look at an uplift, I would be saying, like, trying to get the business to give me examples of things that they think could drive commercial impact. So let's say it's like, you know, inline bundle upsells on a PDP, or like generally things that can give them the ability to like better trade the site, and then factor those into the scope of the project with no additional cost. And usually any business will have like a list of those ready to go. And if they were to do it on the existing platform, it's cost, it's like incremental cost. Whereas if they do it as part of the rebuild, there's no cost essentially in a lot of cases, or minimal uplift to the project. So I feel like that's like one of the things I would often do in that scenario.
Yeah, for me, one of the really interesting processes in any technology change is really grilling the why are we doing this? What? So you always, it's either to add in capability, isn't it, and give the teams better tooling to do stuff that they know is going to help them better execute on their strategy, and that could be directly revenue generating, or it could be about speeding up time to market. Where whatever the benefit, you can put a number to it, because speeding up time to market is a time. So if you can execute something quicker, there's a time saving, and that's a cost against the payroll. You're not saving on the payroll, but you're saving on that time element, which can be used a more value add, or you're getting to revenue quicker, or you could be saving money elsewhere on a license. You could be removing a license you no longer need. So that for me is one of the most fun parts. Is trying to grill on what is driving this and what are the benefits, and how can you timestamp or put a number to it. You should do it to every single investment. There's always a number you can come up with.
Yeah, I agree.
How do you handle future benefits? Because I find this one a bit more challenging sometimes, because people say, oh, look, we put this in, we'll get better conversion. And that always feels really nebulous to me. I know you go to any vendor, they'll have case studies that says these guys got an uplift, but it's not always contextually relevant to the exact use case that you're putting in. How do you handle that to make sure modeling future benefits becomes credible?
To be honest, we'll use other clients a lot of the time, and obviously we primarily operate in fashion and beauty, which helps us. The other thing is we're just going to ask people, so other brands, we do that a lot. And even if they use certain words like it was a really good uplift, it would just help us to put a tiny number next to something, even if we're really conservative. But essentially, because we'll usually be forced, if there is a CFO that doesn't want to create budget for this or an FD or whatever, we'll usually be forced to do like due diligence on anything that we're saying will result in uplift. But yeah, it will usually come from other brands, basically, I would say. Because I agree, like we just had one recently actually, and they were saying, like, this vendor's told us X, and the numbers were like ridiculous, as you'd expect, like crazy positive return. But we knew that even though it's going to get the project signed off, we knew that was never going to be the case. So we went and kind of got hold of like some real, like more conservative numbers, basically.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I would do, is ask basically, if you can find a credible use case or brand that is comparable, and therefore you believe that within a plus minus like 10, 20%, it's going to be a good indication that it's worth doing. Otherwise, you say, well, actually, do you know what? It's a little bit too nebulous to do it. Although I do know some businesses who will happily put it in just to get the business case signed off.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the next one the question is modernising without risking revenue. If you're changing, there is an argument sometimes for big bang, let's get it all in one go, let's benefit from all the feature capabilities. Let's say you're putting in a product discovery engine and you just turn on every single element of it, including personalised product recommendations, all the search piece, semantic search, all of the PLP merchandising, blah, blah, versus let's get it into, if we take product discovery engine, so I've done this before where I've said, let's just get where search is the most important thing, because it's a massive catalog site. Search is the dominant user journey. It's the most complex in terms of getting it configured. And you go for that and you validate that and you measure the impact before you then turn on the other pieces. How do you work, and how do you advise on solution simplification and MVP approach?
Yes, I think this varies massively, dependent on the brand, dependent on how much risk there is in different areas, dependent on the project. Because we've worked with some clients where they just want no change, like they want like for like everything, and obviously that's not physically possible in your moving platform. But they want to minimize change across the board, just so that it's easier to quantify any changes essentially. And some brands just want to test everything, and they'll do that post-launch, etc. And then we've worked with others that essentially have been the complete opposite, and they're willing to take more risk ultimately and big bang, and then they just monitor everything very closely. I'd say ideally you probably want to be somewhere in the middle in most cases, and if you are changing something and you are 100% confident for the better, it's just a case of monitoring it post-launch, in my opinion, and really like knowing what you're changing. I think one of the things that we try to do quite a lot, and I know you do this as well, but essentially up front, when you start to map out all the risks going into a project, quantify the risk. So, and to be fair, we would very rarely do it across something like search. If I'm completely honest, I think if we were moving from one platform to another, in most instances, we're going to be moving to a new search vendor. I feel like what would usually happen is there would just be a set of things that would need to be done for someone to feel confident. And actually, I feel like in most instances, and again, maybe it's the type of brand we're working with, but if the person feels confident in the way that products are being served and the weighting and the kind of merchandising behind it and the results being good and the UI UX being good, people will be fine with that. And then actually that probably wouldn't be something they'd monitor. But something like SEO, which we've got as a separate thing in the notes, so I don't want to eat into it too much. But I think in that scenario, in any project, we would quantify the risk. So obviously that has to be like a line where you invest, and has to be something that you essentially make sure that everyone's really invested in getting right. But I also think it's important to essentially know or like at least estimate how much risk there is from like a non-brand SEO perspective, how much reliance there is, and be able to like forecast good, bad, terrible, and then already have contingency budget from a paid search perspective, and also have like reporting in place post launch. So I've obviously gone quite specific there, but I feel like, to be honest, for me, I feel like a lot of areas we would try and keep the same. So, for example, most of our clients would launch the exact same approach to category merchandising, and that would be very similar. I think the bits that we would usually, I guess, try and be careful with would be like the impact on templates changing significantly, and then in that case, it would just be a case of usually like monitoring numbers and having the right reports in place. Performance across different channels. So something we haven't got here, I'd imagine we'll probably talk about tracking. Actually, a couple of times I spoke to, and we've not been involved in these projects, but a couple of times I've had brands that have really claimed impacts on performance signals, and that impacting the performance of, in particular, Meta, which is quite an interesting one. So yeah, I think things like that, you've just got to try and be super careful with. I feel like I've waffled on for a while now. You're muted, actually, James. I think this is the first time that's ever happened.
I've done it. So for everyone listening, I've done this classic schoolboy. My dog was barking, so I muted myself and started talking again. I'm going to keep that in just to embarrass myself. But yeah, so I'm working with a furniture brand at the moment, and one of the things that they've been doing on the current site on Magento is so wanted to make improvements and changes like category navigation, and also introducing some elements like your shop by room, but also adding in like FAQ blocks into key pages. Is they've added those in early on the current site to measure and benchmark the performance to validate before launch on new site. And I think that's a really smart way of doing it, is even if you don't get it in the most perfectly beautiful implemented thing, just to validate that it's going to have a positive effect before you change things like hierarchies and navigation is really, really important. You can use your existing site as a test bed for a new launch, rather than launch with something you think is compromised and then wait to implement it if you think the financial benefit will be significant in the first 3 to 6 months of that new project.
Yeah, we've actually got a client at the minute where I think we've got 2 clients at the minute we're doing this on, but because the overhead to get kind of tests live has come down significantly, and also to build something in a static format that you can test via a testing tool. So we've got, to this client that I'm thinking, essentially they're going into a redesign, and we're currently testing a load of structural changes to the PDP, and all of that data will actually just go straight into the design process. But I would say that's a real rarity, because this is a client that's in no rush, whereas almost every project we have, they're in a rush and they couldn't delay the design process to get the all of the data and run the tests properly. But yeah, I completely agree. And actually along those lines, in the past, and I think this was quite a few of the times has been with Novos, the SEO agency, but actually to reduce change, they've implemented like loads of SEO changes that they would have wanted to make, like 1 month into a 6-month project on the existing site, just to reduce change on launch. And it's same principle, just reducing change through launch.
Yeah, funnily enough, Novos is the SEO partner of my client as well. It's a small world we all work in, isn't it? I do rate Sam and the team very highly. Which segues nicely onto one of the big commercial worry areas around any migration, whether it is you're upgrading on a current platform and relaunching the storefront and changing parts of it, or you are migrating from platform A to platform B, where you will get different URL structures, etc. It is avoiding SEO traffic drop after migration. Now, it's never 100% perfect because there's always a slight drop. Typically, if it's run technical SEO is run really smartly, that drop is not long term. You start to see really good recovery in a matter of days, and long term you can often get gains to ranking and performance. But how do you, when you hear people within a business, outside the econ team, who are nervous about SEO migration and issues, and they've seen and read horror stories online, how do you advise people handle this and de-risk?
So I think, sometimes there will be significant risk, and that does just require like a lot more planning and discussion. But I think, and again, this comes down to the client that we typically work with, that we will very regularly get that view. And then when it comes to actually like quantifying the risk, like I say, and looking at like, the organic keywords that are actually, driving or at least estimated to be driving their kind of traffic and kind of overall visibility. Like a lot of the cases, it'll be 80% branded, and there's very little risk from a brand perspective usually, and not always, but usually. And then it's just a case of putting a plan in place where they know that they've got the contingency search budget, and essentially just kind of mapping it all out and building a model, scenario based, so that they know it can be counted. And I would actually say, I feel like over the years, I would have completely agreed with that in terms of there'll always be a drop. But I do feel like nowadays, I feel like Google certainly, I feel like it's been a while since I've seen a migration where there has been, or I wouldn't say that, we've definitely seen somewhere there's been a bit of a drop, like you say, but I think it's more common, or at least it's semi-common now, to see a migration where if it's managed really well, for actually there not to be a drop. But again, I think that probably comes down to the mix of brand versus non-brand as well, because if you're heavily branded, there's going to be a lot less risk to organic.
Yeah, definitely. Nothing's really changed on this, has it? Because the search engines have got smarter at understanding migrations if you follow the directives that are set to follow. But I always come at this from, I want an independent technology and agency agnostic tech SEO lead, and this is no denigration of agencies who have SEOs in house. It's just, I've generally found the independent ones who work across platforms have a deeper understanding of the migration complexity and the advice that is required. I'd love to be proven wrong, but that is normally one of the ways that I would advise that people de-risk it. Is it doesn't mean you don't listen to the agency SEOs. You fundamentally should. It's a collaborative process, and they really do add value and they help in discovery. But there are sometimes nuances in the tech decisions and the compromises that need to be made. And I find internal SEOs they've got to work to the confines of how their developers work. An external person is not influenced by that piece. So I know that's probably controversial, and some people will dislike me saying that.
I completely agree. And even, we've done projects with lots of agencies that have full SEO teams, but we've never wanted to use them, because even like the politics, like if you're in the same agency environment and something's gone madly wrong, you're in a way more difficult position even though you don't want, two parties arguing, blah, 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 but it's easier to manage that, I would say.
It is, and that's why I say there's some brilliant SEOs in agencies. I know I've worked with many of them, and they're great. But you're right. The bit that I always worried about is how much they bend the need to bend recommendations to what the developers are saying can and cannot be done, and how do you unpick that if something's fundamentally wrong? It's far harder internally to have that conversation and to get buy-in than it is if an externally contracted person is saying, no, this is a blocker and this is why. Interesting debate. That's a bigger debate for another time as well. But we've got broadly time for one more question. The one that I wanted to get onto is, so again, coming back to that modernising without risking revenue, is what one of the areas I think is really fascinating is looking at how technology change can make e-commerce teams less dependent on developers. Now, I'm not saying developers aren't still critical. They fundamentally are. Senior engineers are absolutely essential in getting good solutions delivered and maintained. But I'm talking about how you can take away like low-level tasks from developers to free their time to value add bigger projects, really do focus on solution architecture and that intelligence piece, not just having to fix issues. But so it's like how I'm seeing and hearing teams doing things like AI prototyping. I just spoke to Tom and Co. We had by the time everyone's listening to this Tom and Co. episode, will be following the week after. Tops Tiles their internal team did prototyping for a new click and collect checkout flow, which enabled them to hone down what they wanted, how they wanted to work, and hand it over to the development partner, who could then build a proper engineered production ready system. So that I think this is a really interesting thing, how you can actually factor in thinking about the de-risking of this, because it's about what you can do more and control more yourself without having to pay somebody and maybe speed up their ability to execute for you.
Yeah, so to be honest, that's a massive trend across the industry. So, we do it all the time. We'll build prototypes of functionality and give it to agencies nowadays just via the AI tools out there and AI extensions for different tools. But I was working on a project last year, and it was with a brand that actually one of the founders, he was like toing and throwing loads around the design or something, and he actually just went and like spent a night building like a really solid prototype using Lovable, and actually like it was I reckon that probably saved a number of weeks on the project, just because that was a really complex part of the business, really complex journey, and for him to just be able to literally throw up exactly how he wanted it to work, it was pretty game changing. But I think overall to your question, I feel like that's probably cost for me. The biggest goals at the moment that driving projects, cost is probably still number one. Number two is agility and relying less on developers and time to value from a features perspective, which are kind of the same thing. I completely agree with that. But I think that prototyping thing is really interesting, because I definitely can see the impact that's already having on like retainer relationships and like the amount of like discovery that's needed for like new features. And I personally like love that kind of stuff as well, and I think it's a game changer.
Well, I think there's two things. Is it gives greater control internally, and I guess boards and C-suite want to know that people are controlling and in control of change, because it has a big commercial impact if you do it right. But the second bit is if you can take time away from really highly experienced qualified engineers to not have to get involved in those early phases, and you leave them to apply their time on think about whether the solution could be improved, what's the best way to get that into the tech stack and the overall solution, that added value engineering that will deliver a more robust, smooth and performance solution. That is a way better use of their time. Otherwise, coming back to your point about managing like the budgets in builds, is you quickly get through time if you don't have a really mature, well thought through brief and concept, because you haven't yet thought through it enough, and therefore you need to use more of their time to help you nail that down. So I think there's good ways that you can get better time to value out of developers. That kind of brings us in. I know we could spend a lot more time talking about lots of topics, but people would fall asleep. For everyone listening, Would love to know what out of this was the most interesting. What questions should we have asked that we haven't that you would like to hear us answer? Because that will help us to look at maybe potential follow-ups to this episode. But thanks as always for listening. We do hope you've enjoyed it, and do reach out and let us know any comments.
You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-commerce strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.